Going back to the crime scene, was a vehicle located at 1803 Edinburgh Square that was identified as belonging to the defendant?
Yes, it was.
What did you have done with that vehicle?
That vehicle, Detective Craig Hill was doing the crime scene. The vehicle was towed then to our animal care and control, where crime lab processes the vehicle, and we obtained a search warrant. Detective Craig Hill did, and Detective Smith the next day met crime lab out there to process the vehicle.
Judge, at this time, pursuant to agreement by the parties, the state is offering for admission into evidence State Exhibit 223 through 235, which are very depictions of the defendant's vehicle as it appeared on April 10th of 2020 in that day, and when it was photographed by crime lab.
No objection to sorry, 223 through 235?
That's correct.
All right, so we'll show 223, through and including 235, admitted without objection.
Permission to publish.
You may. Do you have an update for the court reporter on these items?
I'm not.
Okay, but I will please make sure we get that done before we send the exhibits back to the room.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you.
Regarding 223, State's Exhibit 224. State's Exhibit 225. State's Exhibit 226. State's Exhibit 227. State's Exhibit 228. State's Exhibit 229. State's Exhibit 230. State's Exhibit 231. State's Exhibit 232. State's Exhibit 233. State's Exhibit 234. And State's Exhibit 235. After interviewing the defendant at the homicide office on April the 9th of 2020, was Lori Cleveland requested to respond to the homicide office?
Yes, she was.
And what was Lori Cleveland requested to do once she arrived at the homicide office?
Take photographs, and she eventually recovered his clothing he was wearing, Mr. Dorsey's.
Was the defendant eventually transported to Eskenazi Hospital following your interview with him?
Yes, he was.
Why was the defendant taken to Eskenazi Hospital?
For a blood draw
Why did you want the defendant's blood drawn?
to determine what was in his system during this incident.
Was a DNA sample also recovered from the defendant after his interview?
Yes, it was.
Is that also referred to as a buccal swab?
Yes.
What is the procedure followed by homicide when an individual's DNA sample is collected via a buccal swab?
First of all, we obtained a search warrant for that. It's in a buccal swab kit. It's like a little toothbrush. They swab insides of their mouths on the cheeks. They put it back into this plastic tube, and it goes into an evidence envelope, and it is placed in the property room.
Who collected the defendant's DNA sample via the buccal swab?
Detective Gary Smith, I believe, did.
Now moving ahead to May 8th of 2020, did you request Lori Cleveland to respond back to 1803 Edinburgh Square, Apartment 10 for some follow-up work?
Yes, I did.
Why did you request Lori to go back to 1803 Edinburgh, apartment number 10?
For the recovery of 2 cell phones.
And then on June 17th of 2021, did you meet with Aisha Brown?
Yes, I did.
Why did you meet with Aisha on June 17th of 2021?
She was going to give me a buccal swab as well. I met with her at her work, and we went out in the parking lot. She gave me the swab. She swabbed her cheeks, and we put it back in the envelope in a plastic tube. Then I transported it to the property room.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 201. Do you recognize State's Exhibit number 201?
Yes, this is Aisha Brown's buccal swab, and it's my writing on the front of the evidence envelope.
Thank you. At this time, State Officer, does it appear to be in substantially the same condition as it was when you collected it from Aisha on June 17th of 2021?
Yes, it does.
At this time, State Officer, admission evidence, State Exhibit 201.
So 201 admitted without objection.
No further questions, Judge.
You may cross.
Thank you, Judge.
Detective, you testified that you were assisted by other homicide officers in the investigation, correct?
Yes, sir, I was.
One of those was Detective Craig Hill.
Yes.
Another of those was Detective Keaton.
Yes, I left him out. He assisted me with the search warrants, yes.
And you did receive information from Detective Keaton that he was contacted on the scene by one of Mr. Dorsey's parents, correct?
Yes.
He was contacted by Mr. Dorsey's mother.
Yes.
And Mrs. Dorsey provided Detective Keating with some text messages, is that correct?
Yes.
And those were then forwarded to you.
Yes.
I think you came on the scene pretty quickly, maybe shortly after 3 p.m.
I was on the scene probably within 5 minutes. They were bringing Officer Leath out, the ambulance on a gurney, and I seen that. She was coming out of the building.
And you remained on the scene probably until 7:30, maybe close to 8?
Something like, I don't want to say 8, probably 7:30.
Because it appears from the timestamp on the interrogation video that probably began around 7:45, 7:50.
Right, I probably arrived at headquarters 45 minutes before that.
But you were present when Mr. Dorsey was transported out of the site. You were at the scene when he was transported.
I was at the scene, but I did not physically see him placed in a police car and transported.
And he was transported from the scene several hours before you actually conducted your interrogation.
That is correct, yes.
In fact, I think it's not uncommon when a suspect is brought in to be questioned that they're placed in a room in homicide, correct?
That is correct.
And then there's also an audio and a video feed for that room.
Yes, the detectives or whoever brings him down there, that video is turned on as soon as he is placed in the interview room. It should be.
So the entire time that Mr. Dorsey was in that room, it would have been videotaped, correct?
Correct.
So there was a significant period of time prior to you and Detective Howard questioning him that was videotaped in terms of Mr. Dorsey's, not questioning, but him being in that room.
Yes, that's correct.
And typically when that happens, other detectives who may be available may watch or monitor the individual in that room.
Yes, once an individual is placed in that room as a suspect, it's required that a detective is monitoring that screen. We have it on our computers called iRecord that I can pull up those interview rooms.
And I think you received information from Detective Detective Smith provided you with information as well.
Yes.
And just reviewing the questioning prior to lunch, there were several instances when Mr. Dorsey expressed to both you and Detective Howard concerns for his family. Is that correct?
Correct.
Specifically, he wanted you to contact his family.
Yes, his father, I believe.
And I think at some point, Detective Howard did contact his
Yes,
father. Is that correct?
Detective Howard took care of that, yes.
In addition to the detectives who were at homicide before you arrived to question Mr. Dorsey, they did do some background investigation of Mr. Dorsey.
Yes.
I think there was, for example, a search of criminal history,
Yes,
and it was determined that Mr. Dorsey had never been arrested before.
that's correct.
You also, during Mr. Dorsey's questioning, he admitted that he had been smoking marijuana.
Correct.
And basically, he also stated, in response to your questioning, how much he had smoked.
Yes.
And where that marijuana was in the apartment, correct?
Yes.
And how it was packaged.
Yes.
You never took any steps to have Lori Cleveland go back to that apartment to try and see if she could locate and collect that?
I think I mentioned to one of the detectives on the scene. I think I may have mentioned to one of the detectives on the scene what to look for.
But nothing was recovered.
That is correct. Nothing was recovered.
And when Mr. Dorsey was asked if that marijuana was laced with anything by Detective Howard, he said no.
Correct.
And that nothing was recovered from the scene to test if it was in fact laced.
Right.
Wait 1 second, Judge. That's all the questions I have for Detective Breann.
Redirect?
No, thank you, Judge.
Ladies and gentlemen, do you have questions for this witness? Didn't see any hands on that, sir. You may step down.
I'm sorry, Judge, I have one on that.
You have a permitted question? You may. Sorry, Mr. Brady.
I apologize, Detective Prater. We talked about you having contact with Detective Keedy regarding information that Mr. Dorsey's mother had provided to him, correct?
Correct. Yes.
And the fact that she had provided some text messages to him.
Correct.
And Detective Keedy actually wrote you a memo regarding those text messages, correct?
Yes.
And I'm going to show you what's now been marked for identification as Defendant's Exhibit A. Do you recognize those?
Yes, I do.
Are those the text messages that Mr. Dorsey's mother provided to Detective Keedy?
Yes, yes, they are.
At this time, I move to admit Defendant's A.
No objection.
We show defendants A admitted without objection.
No further questions.
Questions on those questions, Steve? No, Judge. Jurors, questions on any of the questions for the detective? All right, do you see any hands on that, sir? You may step down. State your name when you're next.
State and call Dr. Christopher Poulos.
Promise testimony about to give the jurors will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, under pain and penalty of perjury.
Yes, sir.
Please have a seat. State, for the interest of the folks in the gallery and perhaps the folks on the live stream, Dr. Poulos is the pathologist who's going to be talking about cause of death and injuries, correct?
That is correct, Judge.
And there will be there will be pictures of the injuries actually sustained here, which would be a gunshot wound, some of which may have been fatal wound. Is that correct?
That is correct, Judge.
All right, so the court wants to make sure that those people in the gallery know that these types of photos and images are going to be displayed. The court cannot have any outbursts from the gallery that would have any effect on the jurors whatsoever. So if you're the kind of person that doesn't think that you can watch those kinds of photos without having some type of emotional reaction to it, the court would caution you and ask you to step outside. And for those people that are live streaming, the court has also then made that announcement as well, so the viewing audience would understand what the next witness does involve. So with that, sir, can you please introduce yourself to the jurors and let them know how you spell your name?
My name is Christopher, Christopher, Poulos, Poulos.
And Dr. Poulos, how are you currently employed?
I'm employed as the Chief Forensic Pathologist of Marion County Coroner's Office.
And back in April of 2020, were you employed as a forensic pathologist performing autopsies for the Marion County Coroner's Office?
Yes, sir.
How long have you worked with the Marion County Coroner's Office as a forensic pathologist?
Approximately 6.5 years.
And how long have you been a medical doctor?
Since 2001.
Would you please briefly summarize the degrees you have earned related to being a medical doctor and your professional experience as a medical doctor?
After graduating college, I went to medical school at Indiana University School of Medicine. After graduating with my MD, I passed the 3-step U.S. medical licensing exam. Following medical school, I went to specialty training, otherwise known as a residency in anatomic and clinical pathology. This was also at Indiana University School of Medicine. After residency, I did pass the anatomic and clinical pathology board exams. Following residency, I went to subspecialty training in forensic pathology, also known as a fellowship. This was split between IU School of Medicine and UT Southwestern in Dallas. After this, I had passed my forensic pathology board exams. Since this time, I've been employed by the Milwaukee County Medical Examiner's Office, the Maricopa County Medical Examiner's Office in Phoenix, and now the Marion County Coroner's Office, and I have maintained my board certification.
What states are you licensed to practice medicine?
Indiana, Wisconsin, and Arizona.
And on April the 10th of 2020, did you perform an autopsy on Breann Leath at the Marion County Coroner's Office under case number MC200998?
Yes.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibits 203 through 216. Our state's 203 through 216 fair and accurate depictions of Breann Leath and items of evidence that you collected
during Breann Leath's autopsy as those pictures were depicted, or as those items were depicted, and as Breann Leath was depicted back on April the 10th of 2020.
Yes, sir.
This time, state officers were addition to evidence stated exhibits 203 through 260.
No objection to 203 through 260.
We show 203 through and including 216. Admitted without objection. And again, pursuant to the previous ruling, the testimony of Dr. Poulos will be allowed to be live streamed, but the photographs themselves will not.
Dr. Poulos, referring to State's Exhibits State's Exhibit number 203, what do we see here?
This is the seal on the body pouch used for decedent. What that seal is used for is just to keep that body pouch secure until it reaches our facility. Also, there is a placard showing the evidence technician's initials, a scale, and the case number.
State's Exhibit number 204, what do we see here?
This is the decedent as she arrived in our facility after the bag has been unzipped. Basically what you see is there are paper bags in the hands. Those are for maintaining evidence such as potential DNA. We don't use plastic because that can get condensate on there. Also what you see is evidence of medical intervention such as bandaging of the head, what I believe to be a king-style airway, and a peripheral intravenous line in the left arm.
State's Exhibit number 205.
This is a similar picture, but it's after the towel, the blanket covering the decedent has been removed and the handbags have been removed for evidence collection. What you're seeing here are electrocardiogram pads, another intravenous line, a defect of the right shoulder, electrocardiogram pads, the previously mentioned artificial airway, and a dressing of the head.
Then State's Exhibit number 206.
This is the decedent after she has been initially cleaned. What you can see here are two defects of the left side of the face, one immediately below the left eye, one immediately on the left cheek, so immediately beneath that.
Then State's Exhibit number 207, what do we see here?
This is another view which could be used as an identification view. What we're seeing here are, again, a defect beneath the left eye, a defect of the left cheek, right-sided periorbital ecchymosis, which is basically a bright-sided black eye likely caused by a fracture of the orbital plate, and a very small contusion on the nose.
During Breann Leath's autopsy, did you find any evidence of injury to Breann's body related to gunshot wounds and or projectiles?
Yes.
How many injuries did you find related to gunshot wounds or projectiles in Breann's body?
I found 2 gunshot wounds and a fragment-type injury.
Referring to gunshot wound number 1, what type of gunshot wound was that?
The first gunshot wound that I'll describe was what would be described as a penetrating, so the projectile entered the body and did not leave the body, indeterminate range, so there is no evidence of close range or contact firing gunshot wound. It basically, of the head. Do you want me to go describe further details of the wound, sir?
Well, let's using State's Exhibit number 2 and, State's Exhibit number 208, and let's describe where gunshot wound number 1 was located.
The first gunshot wound be describing was the entrance was immediately beneath the left eye. And you can see it basically in the middle of the picture right beneath her left eye.
And you stated there was not an exit wound, is that correct?
Correct.
Did you attempt to make a determination of whether the wound was associated with close range fire?
There was no evidence of close range or contact firing.
And then what was your conclusion as to whether, strike that, were there any items of evidence recovered from this wound?
Yes, there were projectile fragments.
And what was the direction or path that the bullet traveled from gunshot wound one's points of entry?
The general direction was from front to back and upward without significant side-to-side deviation.
What do we see in State's Exhibit number 209?
This is the entrance from the first gunshot wound described. What we're seeing here is it is relatively round. By being round, that's more consistent with an entrance. There was some evidence of margin of abrasion caused by the bullet rubbing as it enters the body. That's another sign that it's an entrance. Also, there was no evidence of close range or contact firing, so there's no muzzle imprint, no soot, no searing, no gunpowder stippling.
Then State's Exhibit number 210, what do we see here?
These are projectile fragments that were recovered from within the decedent's head at the time of autopsy.
Now referring to gunshot wound number 2, can you please describe that?
This gunshot wound was again a gunshot wound of the head. This was described as a perforating, so the bullet entered and exited the body, indeterminate range, so there's no evidence of close range fire or gunshot wound of the head.
Referring to State's Exhibit 211, what do we see in this photo?
In this case, we see a couple things, but the primary thing we see is the entrance wound from the second wound path on the left cheek. We see that it's relatively round. There was somewhat of a margin of abrasion, again consistent with entrance. There were also features of radiating microlacerations, which are typically seen, in my opinion, and in the standard textbooks as high-velocity rounds.
Were there any items of evidence recovered from this wound?
Not definitively, no.
Was there an exit wound?
Yes, there's an exit wound of the left temporal scalp.
Looking at State's Exhibit number 212, what do we see here?
Here we see the exit defect of the left temporal scalp. This wound, in this case, it was slightly more irregular. There was a margin of abrasion, which is atypical for an exit wound. It may have been called as what's called a shored exit because there may have been something overlying this that supported it.
In State's Exhibit number 213,
That is a similar picture of the exit defect. You can see the entrance defect up to the top of the photograph on the cheek, the exit defect toward the left temporal scalp.
and similar to gunshot wound number 1, did you attempt to make a range determination as it relates to gunshot wound number 2?
Yes, sir. There was no evidence of close range or contact firing.
And the point of direction or path from gunshot wound number 2, point of entry to its exit, what was that?
Predominantly from front to back with slight upward and right to left deviation.
Were there any internal injuries to Breann associated with gunshot wounds number 1 and number 2?
There were numerous internal injuries associated with both, some of which I cannot distinguish which came from which wound path because they're both near. But a brief summary of the internal wounds would include skull fractures, basilar skull fractures, subarachnoid hemorrhage surrounding the brain, cerebrocortical contusions or bruising of the brain, and I'd have to refer to my notes to refer to all of them, but those are the primary.
Sure.
Other injuries include the periorbital ecchymosis of the black eye. That's caused by basically breaking the orbital plate and hemorrhages there. There was patchy subscalp and subgaleal hemorrhage, so basically hemorrhage underlying the scalp outside of the skull. There's temporalis muscle hemorrhage, so basically hemorrhage in the muscle right here. There's disruption of the left eye. There were the fractures I already described. There's subarachnoid hemorrhage, so that's hemorrhage in the leptomeninges, so the meninges, the membrane surrounding the brain. There was hemorrhage within the parts of the brain, including the thalami, the basal ganglion pons. neurons. There's disruption of the circle of Willis, which is the blood vessels surrounding the base of the brain, and there were bruises of the brain. There was some hemoaspiration of blood, which means blood got into the airways, probably from her bleeding.
And based on your prior testimony, I believe you stated that due to the close proximity of gunshot wound number 1 and number 2, some of those injuries potentially overlapped with those 2 wounds? Is that
Yes, sir.
correct? Now referring to State's Exhibit number 214, what do we see here?
This was a small fragment injury of her right shoulder, basically a very superficial, approximately 1/8 inch injury. I'll check the measurement to be certain. Yes, 1/8 inch, with basically a small metallic fragment. I believe that to have come from a projectile that for some reason had fragmented between the muzzle of the firearm and the decedent.
And this is the third wound that you originally spoke about at the beginning of your testimony, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Now I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 215. What do we see here?
Again, we see both of the wounds in the face, and then we see that small defect on the shoulder.
Were there any items of evidence recovered associated with this wound?
There's a very small metallic fragment.
And then State's Exhibit number 216, what do we see here?
The box to contain that small metallic fragment.
Based on your medical expertise and training, the injuries sustained by Breann Leath from gunshot wounds numbers 1 and number 2, what would her likely physical reaction have been as a result of being shot in these areas of her body?
These are wounds that, in my medical opinion, would result in immediate unconsciousness and unresponsiveness.
Are gunshot wounds number 1 and number 2 the type of wound that someone is likely to survive or recover from?
I am not a treating physician. I'm not a neurosurgeon, but in my medical opinion, these are wounds that certainly without and almost certainly with medical intervention would be fatal injuries.
What was Breann Leath's cause of death?
Gunshot wounds of the head.
And what was Breann Leath's manner of death?
Homicide.
Nothing further, Judge.
Any cross? One of the others up.
Doctor, as part of the autopsy process, blood samples are taken and sent for toxicology analysis, right?
Yes.
And in some cases, results of that toxicology analysis might inform your conclusion as to whether it's the cause or the manner of death.
In some cases, yes.
Yes. And in Ms. Leath's case, even though there were obvious gunshot wounds to the head, blood sample was still taken and sent for toxicology.
Yes.
And the blood was tested for a number of substances.
Yes.
And included in that were 4 types of synthetic cannabinoids.
I would have to look at what was tested in this particular toxicology. May I do so?
Yes.
Yes.
And 7 types of bath salts.
Yes.
No further questions.
Read the record.
And the results of those tests?
Yes. They were negative.
Nothing further, Judge.
Further questions? Ms. Martin?
No.
Ladies and gentlemen, do you have questions for this witness? I don't see any hands on that, so you may sit down. State, can I call you next?
State call is Michael Cooper.
Please feel free to stand and stretch if you need.
And actually, Judge, before Mr. Cooper takes a stand, we do have a stipulation that we can take care of now, if that's okay with the court.
Okay.
This is State's Exhibit number 217. This is a stipulation of the parties related to autopsy evidence. Stipulation reads, comes down the state of Indiana by Assistant Prosecuting Attorney Robert Beatson, the defendant, in person by counsel Raymond Casanova and Dina Martin, who agree and stipulate to the following facts. Number one, during the autopsy of Breann Leath, evidence technician supervisor Thomas Clark of the Indianapolis Marion County Forensic Services Agency took possession of the following items. A, item 48, metal fragments recovered from the brain in a sealed envelope. And B, item 49, metal fragments recovered from the right shoulder in a sealed envelope. And number two, the chain of custody for item 48 and 49 is complete.
All right, we show states exhibit number 217 admitted by stipulation of the parties. Is that correct, Mr. Casanova? That is correct. All right.
And that's sort of the number of that.
Number 217. Before I swear in the next witness. Glass of water? Good. Okay. Good. Okay. Promise what you're about to tell the jurors will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth under pain and penalty of perjury?
I do.
Please have a seat.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Once you're comfortable in your chair, could you please introduce yourself to the jurors and let them know how you spell your name?
Michael Cooper, Michaelcooper.
Sir, how are you employed?
I'm employed by the Indianapolis Marion County Forensic Services Agency, which is also known as the Crime Lab.
And what do you do at the crime lab?
I'm a firearms examiner.
And how long have you been with the crime lab?
I've been here with this crime lab, I believe, 16 years. I have a total of 25 years at this point.
Before joining the crime lab here in Indianapolis, did you work in the forensic sciences field before?
Yes, I did in Illinois, Chicago, and also Carbondale, Illinois.
What type of educational background do you have related to your role as a forensic scientist?
I have a bachelor's degree in biological science.
And what type of training do you have to undergo to become an examiner with the crime lab?
I did my training in Chicago. It was a 2-year written, oral, and practical training program, and every facet of that program had to be completed with a 100% accuracy.
And then is there annual or regular training that you need to complete in order to maintain your employment with the crime lab here in Indianapolis?
Yes, we do have those tests every year.
Now, as firearms examiner at the crime lab, were you tasked with examining evidence related to IMPD case number IP200358893?
Yes.
Now I'm going to go through some of those items with you. The first item I'm going to show you has been previously admitted as State's Exhibit number 150. It was identified as the firearm recovered from Officer Leath's duty belt. Sir, if you could open up that box for me and first make sure that that item is safe, and then we'll talk about it.
This item is unloaded, and it has been strapped also for extra safety.
Now, sir, while you hold that up for the jury, if you could explain for us what that item is.
This particular item is a Glock pistol. It's a 9mm Luger caliber.
And let's break that down. So when you say it's a Glock pistol, is Glock the brand that manufactures that item?
Yes.
And when you say it's a 9mm Luger, what does that mean?
That is the caliber that you would have to use for this particular firearm. Each firearm has potential to have different calibers, and this one just happens to be a 9mm.
Now, what type of analysis did you conduct on State's Exhibit number 150?
I test fired the firearm along with the magazine that was submitted with it.
And to be clear, that magazine was item number 14. Or I'm sorry, do you mean the magazine that was submitted in the box with that firearm?
I'm trying to remember if it was submitted in with it. I believe it was a separate. Sorry, let me check my notes really quick, so I don't remember now. Okay, it was item 14A, so it was submitted separately from this firearm.
And there was item 14A, which was previously testified about being the handgun magazine recovered from the hallway of the apartment. So what type of testing was done between the firearm that we see there and then item 14?
Just that the magazine would fit and function in the firearm.
I'll show you now it's been admitted as State's Exhibit number 176. Same thing, sir, if you could open this box and first make sure that it's safe. And that's been identified as State's Exhibit number 176, which was a Glock handgun recovered from the dresser drawer in the master bedroom of 1803 Edinburgh Square, apartment 10.
This firearm has also been unloaded and strapped for safety.
Now, if you could hold that up for the jury and explain to us what that item is.
This is also a Glock pistol. This particular one is a .40 caliber pistol.
When you say 40 caliber, does that just mean that it's a different size round of ammunition than State's Exhibit 150 would fire?
That's correct, yes.
Now, what type of analysis did you conduct on this item?
The same as the other. I used the Glock to test fire using the magazine that accompanied this particular Glock.
And when you say you test fired it, it was in working order, it was able to fire bullets?
Yes, there were no mechanical malfunctions.
And what was the capacity of this weapon?
I'll have to refer to my notes on that. I'm not sure. It was stamped capacity. The capacity was stamped as 17 rounds.
And what does that mean when you're talking about the capacity of a firearm?
That's how many rounds can fit in the magazine. And if you fully load a magazine, you can also put one round in the chamber. So some people would call it 17 plus 1.
And when you say in the chamber, what does that mean?
That means the cartridge would be put into the chamber, this area here. You have to rack the slide back, put a cartridge within the firearm, and then put a fully loaded magazine within. So if this held, say, 15 rounds, you would now actually have 16 rounds in the gun.
I'm going to show you what's previously been admitted as State's Exhibit number 177, which is a Smith & Wesson handgun recovered from the closet in the master bedroom of 1803 Edinburgh Square, apartment number 10. And same thing, sir, if you'd open up that box for us and make sure that the item is safe.
This firearm is also unloaded and strapped for safety.
And if you could describe for us what type of firearm that is.
This particular firearm is a Smith & Wesson, and it is a .40 caliber pistol.
So same caliber is State's Exhibit number 176, but a different manufacturer?
Yes.
And what analysis did you perform on Exhibit 177?
Again, I test fired the firearm with a magazine and had no mechanical malfunctions.
And what is the capacity of Exhibit number 177?
This one is stamped as 14, or 14 plus 1 if 1 was in the chamber.
Now I'm going to show you what's been previously admitted as State's Exhibit number 164, which was identified as a firearm recovered from the hallway, 1803 Edinburgh Square, apartment number 10. And sir, if you could open up that item for us and make sure that it's safe, please.
This firearm has also been strapped for safety and is unloaded.
And if you could describe that firearm for us, please.
This is actually a pistol. I know it looks more like a rifle, but because it does not have the stock and the way that it was made at the factory, it's a pistol, and it's a .556 caliber semi-automatic pistol.
Now, before we talk about the caliber, we've seen some photos of that previously. Can you show us on that weapon where the magazine would be inserted if there was a magazine inside of it?
It would be in here on the bottom.
And when you talk about the caliber being a .556, what does that mean?
It's basically, again, like 9mm. Fits that particular type of firearm. 40 caliber. It's a very small bullet, but it travels at a higher rate of speed. I'm not really sure what else I can say about that.
Sure. We also heard some statements with reference to a .556 or a NATO round of ammunition. When we talk about a .556 NATO, what does that term mean with regards to ammunition?
That's just the name of it. .556 NATO is kind of close to .223 Remington. So one of the calibers could go, say, a .223 can fire in a .556. 5.56 may fire in a .223, but it's not really advisable. So it's really supposed to be not backwards compatible, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Sure. So moving on from that firearm, I want to talk about the different component parts of a round of ammunition. And sir, do you have a demonstrative that would help you explain your testimony to the jury when we're talking about what makes up a round of ammunition?
Yes, I do.
So we've heard reference to cartridges. What are the different parts of a cartridge?
May I use my demonstrative?
Please.
If you don't mind, I'll stand up. I'm feeling kind of short back there. You might be able to see. This is an enlarged cartridge. So the cartridge is made up, I know most of us grew up, even myself, calling it bullets. I need to get bullets for my gun. But you're actually getting cartridges for your gun. And the cartridge is the cartridge case. The cartridge case has a primer back here. There's a bullet that's in the cartridge case. And then there's also gunpowder within the cartridge case. So what happens is, when this is struck by a firing pin or a hammer, this is the primer again, it causes a very minute spark to go inside of this cartridge case. And even though it seems like it just immediately fires out, because it is really fast, it actually builds up enough pressure to push this out. So you're getting the bullet leaving the cartridge case, and the cartridge case will be either, depending on the type of firearm, it will stay in the firearm, or it will be ejected out in some way.
Now, all four firearms that you've displayed for the jury, are those all semi-automatic weapons?
Yes.
What does it mean to say that something is semi-automatic, and what does that mean for what happens to the casing when a gun is fired?
Depending on the firearm, like I said before, this the bullet will leave. The cartridge case may stay in the chamber if it's not a semi-automatic. For instance, you have to crank the barrel down and pull it out, or it'll pop out. Mostly it's a single shot style, or maybe like a double barrel shotgun where you put two in and then you fire, and then sometimes you can, it's like a break action and they'll fly out, but sometimes you got to pull them out. So it just doesn't automatically go every time you shoot.
What about a semi-automatic weapon? What happens?
The semi-automatic is the one where the bullet is fired and the cartridge case gets ejected.
Now, is there a method that a firearms examiner can use to determine if a fired bullet or a cartridge case is associated with a particular firearm?
It's possible, yes.
What does that process look like?
We use a comparison microscope, and in this case, if we have a firearm, we would shoot test shots for those. So those become a known, because I know that I physically loaded this I scribed it. I made sure I tracked it. So I know that these bullets and cartridge cases were from a particular gun. So then I would take the evidence, which would be the unknown, and I would compare those to the test shots and try and determine, and it'd be light caliber. I wouldn't necessarily take a 45 and compare it to a 22, but if it's light caliber, then I would compare that using that comparison microscope.
Now, you said that you wouldn't compare a 22 to a 45. Is that because based on the caliber, you automatically know that those two rounds could not have been fired at the same time?
Visually, you could just look at those and know that there was no way.
So this test firing and comparison process that you've described, did you complete that process on some of the items that you looked at for this case?
Yes, I did.
So I'm going to show you now several cartridge casings, which have been previously admitted into evidence. Specifically, we're looking at item number 9, which is State Exhibit number 157, which was a cartridge casing recovered from the landing of the apartment. Item 11, State Exhibit number 158, which was another cartridge casing recovered from the landing of the apartment. Item 15, which is State Exhibit number 159, which was a casing recovered from the top floor hallway of the apartment. Item 16, which is State Exhibit number 160, which is a cartridge casing recovered from the hallway of the apartment building. Item number 19, which is State's Exhibit number 161, which is a casing recovered from the living and dining area of apartment 10. Item 20, which is State's Exhibit number 162, which is another cartridge casing recovered from the living dining area of apartment 10. Item 21, which is State's Exhibit number 163, which is a casing recovered from the hallway inside of apartment 10. Item 23, which is State's Exhibit number 171, which was a cartridge casing recovered from the hallway inside of apartment number 10. Item 24, State's Exhibit number 172, which was a cartridge casing recovered from the hallway inside of apartment number 10. Item 25, which is State's Exhibit number 173, which was a cartridge casing recovered from the kitchen inside of apartment number 10. Item 26, which is State's Exhibit number 174, which was a cartridge casing recovered from the kitchen of apartment number 10. And item 27, which was State's Exhibit number 175, which was a cartridge casing recovered from the hallway inside of apartment number 10. So, sir, did you conduct an analysis on all of those cartridge casings?
Yes, I did.
And what did you perform the analysis that you talked about where you compared those to known test casings that were ejected from known weapons that you test fired?
Yes.
Before we talk about the results of this testing, what caliber was each one of those casings?
Sorry, I already had a cheat sheet. So the 223-556 caliber were items 9, 11, 15, 16, 19, 20, 21, 23, 24, 25, 26, and 27.
So all of those casings were the same caliber?
Yes.
Now, was there some discrepancy in the brand of those casings?
Yes, I'd have to go back to my notes to see which one were the brands, but they were definitely the same caliber.
It's fair to say that there was some Winchester brand and some PSD.
Yes.
But the important thing is that they're the same caliber, which makes them work in any weapon of that caliber.
Correct. The brand really doesn't mean anything other than who manufactured those cartridges.
And with regards to the analysis that you conducted on those items, were you able to reach a conclusion about the weapon that fired those casings?
Yes.
And what was that?
The 223-556 were fired by item 22, which is the Kel-Tec pistol that looks like a rifle.
Did you also conduct an analysis on fired bullets and bullet jackets?
Yes, I did.
Actually, let me back up. We talked about bullets before using a demonstrative. What is a bullet jacket?
Bullet jacket, this is the bullet right here. This is hollow just because it's a demonstrative. But normally you would have lead within this to make it heavier. And this outer portion is actually very thin, the way it looks right now. And sometimes when a bullet is fired and it hits a hard object, it will fragment this outer part. The part that's in in the back, the lead can get broken and come out. So one bullet can basically turn into several fragments if it hits something hard.
Now, we just heard a stipulation regarding item number 48, which was identified as metal fragments recovered from the brain of Officer Breann Leath during an autopsy. What do you do with item number 48 when you receive it to conduct your analysis?
If it's something that's just small fragments, I mean, we still have to go through the process. We always bleach every bullet that we will work, or any fragments that we work with for safety. And we will clean them if there's a reason to clean them. And then with whatever we have left, we try to see if possibly, because you still potentially could get a piece of this fragment could break off and you could have it in your evidence, and you might be able to identify that to a gun via the test shots.
Now, when you examined item number, so let me back up. That comes to you as item number 48, described as metal fragments. Do you separate out those fragments into sub-items?
We do normally, unless there are just so many of them and we can't really find any kind of individual characteristics that would lead us to something. We may just go, well, since these are unsuitable anyway, we're just going to keep them in the one item and just say 3 fragments or 2 fragments or whatever we have.
And when you say unsuitable, do you mean something that's too small or damaged to be of any value for a comparison?
Correct. Like going back to the bullet, you can see this is the stria from the rifling. And if we got a piece that was right here, it would have no value to us whatsoever because it never touched the rifling of the barrel, so we wouldn't know what it went to.
So when you processed item number 48, did you break that into 3 distinct sub-items?
Yes.
And what were those?
I believe it was A, B, and C.
And item 48A was a fired bullet jacket fragment.
.48A was, yes, fired bullet jacket fragment.
And what about item 48B?
Also a fired bullet jacket fragment.
And then 48C?
Those were 7 metal fragments.
I'm going to show you some other exhibits that were previously admitted. So now you're looking at item number 5, which is State Square. Item number 6, which is State's Exhibit number 153, which is another fired bullet recovered from that landing. Item 34, which is State's Exhibit number 178, which was recovered from the door of apartment 12. And item 35, which is State's Exhibit number 179, which was taken from the hallway of apartment 12. So, sir, did you conduct an analysis on those items as well as item 48A that you described, the bullet jacket fragment from the autopsy?
Yes, I did.
And what were you able to conclude about those items of evidence?
Sorry, item 5, 6, 34, 35, and 48A, is that correct?
Correct.
Those were apparent .223 5.56 caliber.
And was there sufficient detail to identify or eliminate them as having been fired by a specific weapon?
Actually, they were inconclusive to item 22, which would be the one that it could be to. But in this case, it was inconclusive to item 22, and it was also inconclusive as a group.
But because of the caliber of those fragments and fired bullets, those would only have been able to have been fired from a 5.56 weapon. Is that correct? Or let me back up. They could not have been fired from any of the 3 handguns that you processed.
That's correct, yes.
And did you also examine some items that ended up being unsuitable for comparison?
Yes, I did.
And does that include item number 7, which was previously submitted as State's Exhibit number 155, which was a metal fragment recovered from the landing of 1803 Edinburgh Square?
Yes.
What about with regards to items 48B and 48C?
Those, along with 49, are unsuitable for comparison.
So the other items recovered from the autopsy were unsuitable?
Yes.
So in conclusion, all of the fired cartridge cases were fired by item number 22, which is exhibit number 164?
Yes.
And all of the fired bullets and bullet jackets that you examined were that .556 caliber?
Correct.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Nick Cross?
Mr. Cooper, I want to ask you just a couple of questions about your item 22, which is the Caltech pistol. That, when you received it, had a magazine, correct?
Yes, sir.
And in that magazine, there were 27 unfired cartridges, correct?
Well, whenever I received it, the cartridges had been removed, I'm assuming by crime scene or whoever, and it was packaged in a separate envelope. But yes, that was the amount, 27 unfired cartridges.
And that magazine has a capacity of 40.
That's correct.
So there were a number of unfired cartridge casings that fit that magazine that you were given along with that weapon, correct?
That's correct.
So basically, there were still up to 27 shots that weapon could have fired.
I can't say that they were in the magazine at that time, but I did receive that amount of cartridges in a separate envelope.
And those are the only other cartridges you received from the crime scene that would have fit with that Caltech weapon.
That's correct.
I have no further questions, Judge.
Redirect?
Mr. Cooper, so if the capacity of the magazine plus the one in the chamber, what's the total capacity of that weapon?
You would have 40, and then you could have the +1 if you put that into the chamber, for a total of 41.
I have nothing further, Your Honor, but I would move to admit exhibits 220 and 221, which were items 48 and 49 covered by that stipulation.
Any objections to 220 and 221? No objection. Show 220 and 221 admitted without objection. I'm sorry, Mr. Casanova, any further questions for this witness? No, Judge. Ladies and gentlemen, do you have questions for this witness? Didn't see any hands on that. Sir, you may step down.
Thank you, Your Honor.
State, you may call your next.
At this time, Judge, the state has two stipulations for the jury.
Okay.
First being states 190.
You wish to read that into the record?
Yes, Judge, thank you.
And Mr. Casanova, is that correct? 190 is an agreement or stipulation of the parties?
Yes, sir.
All right, so ladies and gentlemen, again, the state will read in to the record. State's exhibit number 190 will be admitted as an exhibit for your consideration. And then the items that are contained within 190 are to be matters that we should consider to be conclusively proven. With that, state, you may read.
Thank you. Stipulation of parties DNA analysis comes now in the state of Indiana by its Deputy Prosecuting Attorney Robert Beatson and the defendant in person and by counsel Raymond Casanova and Dina Martin, who agree and stipulate to the following facts. Crime scene specialist Lori Cleveland swabbed several items of evidence to recover possible DNA. Number 2, item 39 collected by crime scene specialist Cleveland was identified as clothing belonging to Elliahs Dorsey to include 1 pair of shorts, gray Adidas brand size 2XL with possible blood on the left leg, 1 sweatshirt, black Tech Gear size XXL, and 1 sleeveless shirt, red unknown brand size 6XL, recovered from Elliahs Dorsey at 50 North Alabama Street. Number 3, item 39 was processed by forensic scientist Sangeeta Joshi of the Marion County Forensic Indianapolis Marion County Forensic Services Agency, who examined item 39 for the presence of human blood. 4, forensic scientist Joshi identified item 39.1 as a pair of gray-colored Adidas shorts. Forensic scientist Joshi detected blood of probable human origin on the outside of the lower left leg of the shorts. These samples were collected and packaged for DNA analysis as item 3.39.1.1, stain number 1, item 39.1.2, stain number 2, and item 39.1.3, stain number 3. Number 5, the chain of custody for item 39 and derivative items 39.1, 39.11, 39.12, and 39.1.3 is complete. 6, buccal cells are cells that line the inside of a person's cheeks. A swab of these buccal cells can be collected for use in DNA analysis. 7, IMPD Detective Gary Smith collected a buccal cell swab from Elliahs Dorsey. The swab from Elliahs Dorsey is identified as item 60, and the chain of custody for item 60 is complete. 8, IMPD Detective Mark Prater collected a buccal cell swab from Aisha Brown. The swab from Aisha Brown is identified as item 61, and the chain of custody for item 61 is complete. Number 9, during the autopsy of Breann Leath, a blood sample was obtained by Dr. Christopher Poulos and collected by Evidence Technician Supervisor Tom Clark of the Indianapolis Marion County Forensic Services Agency. The blood sample from Breann Leath is identified as item 42. A dried and sealed blood-stained card was produced from item 42 and identified as item 42.1. The chain of custody for item 42 and item 42.1 is complete. 10, forensic scientist Elena Krager with the Indianapolis Marion County Forensic Services Agency conducted DNA analysis on these items collected by crime scene specialist Cleveland and forensic scientist Joshi using the buccal swabs collected from Elliahs Dorsey and Aisha Brown and the blood sample collected from Breann Leath. Number 11, forensic scientist Krieger's analysis yielded the following results. A, item 5.1 was one swab of possible DNA recovered from the edges of a fired bullet. The DNA profile matches the DNA profile of Aisha Brown and is estimated to occur once in more than 330 billion unrelated individuals. B, item 6.1.1 was one possible blood swab recovered from the nose and base of the fired bullet. The DNA profile matches the DNA profile of Aisha Brown, item 61, and is estimated to occur once in more than 330 billion unrelated individuals. C, item 7.1 was one swab of possible DNA recovered from the entire surface of a metal fragment. The DNA profile matches the DNA profile of Aisha Brown, item 61, and is estimated to occur once in more than 330 billion unrelated individuals. D, item 22.1.1.1 was a swab of possible DNA recovered from the head stamps of 27 unfired casings. The DNA profile matches the DNA profile of Elliahs Dorsey, item 60, and is estimated to occur once in 13 billion unrelated individuals. E, item 22.1.2 was one swab of possible DNA recovered from the magazine. Due to insufficient sample data, the DNA profile is inconclusive. Therefore, no comparison could be made. A male component was observed. F, item 22.2.1 was one swab of possible DNA recovered from the head stamp of one unfired casing. Due to an insufficient amount of DNA being detected during quantification, short tandem repeat STR analysis was not performed. G, item 22.3 was one swab of DNA recovered from the pistol. The DNA profile is an inconclusive mixture of 3 individuals. Due to insufficient sample data, no comparisons could be made. A male component was observed. H, item 22.4.1 was one swab of possible DNA recovered from the plastic fasteners of a strap. The DNA profile is an inconclusive mixture of at least 2 individuals. Due to insufficient sample data, no comparisons could be made. A male component was observed. I, item 35.1 was one swab of possible DNA recovered from the nose and base edges of a fired bullet. Due to an insufficient amount of DNA being detected during quantitation, short tandem repeat STR analysis was not performed. J, item 39.1.1 was blood stain number 1 from the outside of the lower left leg of the shorts labeled as from Elliahs Dorsey. The DNA profile matches the DNA profile of Breann Leath, item 42.1, and is estimated to occur once in more than 330 billion unrelated individuals. K, item 39.1.2 was blood stain number 2 from the outside of the lower left leg of the shorts labeled as from Elliahs Dorsey. The DNA profile matches the DNA profile of Breann Leath, item 42.1, and is estimated to occur once in more than 330 billion unrelated individuals. L, item 39.1.3 was blood stain number 3 from the outside of the lower left leg of the shorts labeled as from Elliahs Dorsey. The DNA profile is a mixture of 2 individuals with a major and minor contributor. The DNA profile of the major contributor matches the DNA profile of Breann Leath, item 42.1, and is estimated to occur once in more than 330 billion unrelated individuals. Due to insufficient sample data, the DNA profile of the minor contributor is inconclusive. Therefore, no comparisons could be made. A male component was observed. 12. Forensic scientists Joshi and Krieger cannot offer an opinion as to how the blood and DNA detected on the items above came to be located there. Pursuant to State's Exhibit 190 in that stipulation, Judge, State is offering for admission into evidence remaining DNA/serology items of evidence. State's Exhibit number 200, the buccal swab collected from Elliahs Dorsey, in State's Exhibits 191, 192, 193, and 194.
Mr. Casanova, do you agree those items are admitted pursuant to the stipulation of the parties?
Yes, Judge.
All right, so we'll show item 200, number 191, 192, 193, and 194 admitted by stipulation of the parties.
And Judge, again, there are 2 other, items of evidence. Item number 218, the autopsy blood tube, and then 218, the autopsy blood tube, and 219, the blood stain card also.
Is that pursuant to stipulation?
Yes, Judge.
Mr. Casanova, do you agree?
Yes, Judge.
So 218 and 219 are admitted by stipulation of the parties.
Judge, we have one more stipulation,
Okay.
which is identifies State's Exhibit number 222. The stipulation reads as follows. Comes down to the state of Indiana by its Deputy Prosecuting Attorney Robert Beatson, and the defendant in person and by counsel Raymond Casanova and Dina Martin, who agree and stipulate the following facts.
Hang on just a second, Mr. Casanova, Ms. Martin, you agree 222 comes in pursuant to stipulation? 222. Correct. All right. All right, Mr. Beatson, you may read into the record again, ladies and gentlemen, you should consider the matters contained within 222 as being conclusively proven.
Thank you, Judge. Stipulation reads, number 1, IMPD Detective Gary Smith obtained a search warrant to collect a blood sample from Elliahs Dorsey. Number 2, IMPD Detective Matthew Panconi transported Elliahs Dorsey from the homicide office at the City County Building to Eskenazi Hospital in order to collect the blood sample. Number 3, registered nurse Jessica Rand drew a gray top tube of blood from Elliahs Dorsey for toxicology screening. Registered nurse Rand drew a second gray top tube of blood from Elliahs Dorsey for ethyl alcohol screening. Detective Panconi collected the 2 gray top tubes of blood. Number 5, Detective Panconi then transported Elliahs Dorsey back to the homicide office at the City County Building. Number 6, Detective Panconi turned over the blood samples to IMPD Sergeant Michael Duke. Number 7, Sergeant Duke then transported the blood samples to the IMPD property building. Number 8, forensic scientist Kathy Walton of the Indianapolis-Marion County Forensic Services Agency conducted a blood alcohol examination on one of the blood samples identified as item 55.1. The ethyl alcohol concentration in item 55.1 was 0.000%. Number 9, at the request of IMPD Detective Matthew Panconi, analyst Robert Rule of the Indiana State Department of Toxicology conducted a full panel drug screen of the second blood sample, identified as Department of Toxicology item 1A. A full panel drug screen by the Indiana Department of Toxicology screens for 12 classes of drugs. Department of Toxicology item 1A tested positive only for THC, which is the principal psychoactive constituent of cannabis, and THC-COOH, which is a metabolite of THC. Number 9, the chain of custody for item 55.1 5.1, and Department of Toxicology, item 1A is complete.
Any further stipulations at this time, Steve?
No, Your Honor, at this point, the state rests.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes all of the evidence on behalf of the state of Indiana. At this time, we will take recess for the lawyers and I to cover some legal issues, get prepared for the next phase of the trial.